Next week, 7 Democratic presidential candidates will head to California for the last primary debate of 2019. Here's a look at the candidates who will be on stage in Los Angeles. They faced a Thursday deadline to qualify. For a closer look at how the race is shaping up in California, I'm joined by Doug Sovern. He's a political reporter for KCBS Radio in San Francisco. Welcome, Doug. So Mike Bloomberg will not be on the debate stage next week. His campaign has said that's not his goal anyway, but that's not stopping him from betting big on California. What can you tell us about Bloomberg's campaign efforts in that state?
Yeah, California is really key to his strategy. He's skipping the first 4 primary and caucus states. He was just out here the last couple of days, and his goal is to spend a lot of money here, make inroads with campaign appearances. And even though he's not in these debates, because A, he's not going to meet the fundraising goal because he's not raising money independently, he's paying for it all himself. He's going to hit the hustings as much as he can and spend as much money as he can on commercials. So he came out, he's going to spend $14 million over the next 3 weeks just in California on advertising.
Ooh, that's a lot of money. So, Doug, has Bloomberg scored any notable endorsements to date?
Yeah, he got the endorsement of Sam Liccardo, the mayor of San Jose, and yesterday he picked up the endorsement of Michael Tubbs, who is the up-and-coming African-American mayor of Stockton, who was a key Kamala Harris supporter, so that's a big one for him. He appeared with former Governor Jerry Brown yesterday to talk about climate change, but Brown notably did not endorse him yet. And he talked about how he's an old hand at presidential campaigns. He's keeping his powder dry for now. But I mentioned $14 million. That is exactly how much Jerry Brown spent in its entirety on all 3 of his runs for president. And Bloomberg's going to spend that in 3 weeks just in California.
And what about Governor Newsom? We know he was about to go to Iowa to support Senator Kamala Harris before she dropped out of the race. Has Newsom indicated which candidate he will support instead?
No, he hasn't. He's old friends with Kamala Harris. They share the same political strategy team. It was no surprise that he was all in quite early for her. He was going to be in Iowa this weekend, in fact, to campaign for Harris. Now that she's out of the race, he hasn't really given much indication which way he's going to go, and I think he's waiting for the right opportunity. How much impact his endorsement will have, if he were to back someone like a Pete Buttigieg, that would be a real boost to someone like Buttigieg. But if he were to support Biden, for example, Joe Biden, how much weight would that really carry with the voters in California? It's hard to say. Brown's endorsement, even though he's the former governor, may end up actually mattering more in some ways to voters than Gavin Newsom's. And it also, we don't know how much voters really vote based on endorsements anyway.
Good point. What about another frontrunner, Bernie Sanders? He's also been focusing on California. How is he doing there? And what has his campaign strategy been?
Well, he's doing really well out here, actually. He has his core of the nurses union. We're early supporters of his. He's got some key labor support. He has his ardent following that maybe has a ceiling, but they don't go away from him. They don't change with the tides, as we've seen in this very fluid race out here. He has surged into the lead. Initially, Biden was leading in the polls in California. Then Elizabeth Warren had a strong summer and vaulted into first place. But in the last few weeks, Bernie Sanders has taken over that top spot. Warren is a close second. Biden has really tumbled to about 14%. He's a distant third. And Buttigieg has risen up to where he's now a close fourth behind Biden. So it's really a 4-way race here. And even before Kamala Harris dropped out, she wasn't much of a factor, even in her home state. So Bernie Sanders' core support remains strong, and I think they will. The question is, can Warren or Biden or even Buttigieg overtake him here?
So, Doug, meanwhile, a new poll by UC Berkeley's Institute of Governmental Studies says climate change is a top issue for California Democrats. I guess not surprisingly, since they really are on the front lines of a lot of these wildfires. So, how much are candidates focusing on climate issues while campaigning in California?
Well, Bloomberg made a big point of his very first visit to San Francisco as a presidential candidate yesterday was to talk about climate change. Now, it's important to him. He and Governor Brown had co-chaired the America's Pledge climate campaign a couple of years back anyway. But it's not lost on him that this is something that is very important to Californians, especially with, as you mentioned, all the wildfires we've had the last few years. And yeah, that polling showed that the key issues for Californians are similar to the way voters feel around the rest of the country: climate change, health care, things like, those are the most important issues out here. So I would expect those will be addressed on that debate stage, too. There are other issues, though, that are more resonant in California than I think they are in some other parts of the country. Housing and homelessness being key among those here.
Yeah, absolutely. So looking ahead to next week's debate in Los Angeles, which issues are you hoping to hear the most about?
I think we'd all like to hear some of these candidates talk about the homeless crisis in California and how do you produce more affordable housing. At the federal level, there isn't that much for them to do beyond allocate more money, that sort of thing, provide incentives for cities and counties within the state. I do think that immigration will obviously be a top issue in that debate. You're going to be having a debate in Los Angeles. You're in California, not far from the border. Immigration has to come up. Healthcare, again, because it's so important to voters all across the country, and it's someplace where you see some rather stark differences among the candidates, unlike things like housing and immigration, where they largely agree. But I would think the issues wouldn't vary that much from the other debates we've seen, except perhaps they'll bring up something like the homeless issue. The candidates who've been bringing that up on the stump a lot, Julian Castro, Bloomberg yesterday, aren't going to be on this debate stage, so we'll have to see.
Doug Sovern in Oakland, California, we thank you so much for your insight into the Sunshine State.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.